Hey guys, and welcome to the second part of my HitFilm Express beginner tutorial. No, it's not in your mind, you're actually a little bit closer, and the reason I keep changing my setup is because it always feels a bit too formal, like I'm giving a presentation to an audience rather than just talking to friends. So I figured I'd bring you in a little bit closer, make this a little bit more personal, and if you feel strongly one way or the other, feel free to let me know down in the comment sections below. In the last part for this HitFilm Express beginner tutorial, I covered most of the basics, from importing your media files to editing, adding effects, transitions, all the way through to exporting your final video. However, one topic that I deliberately left out altogether is composite shots. Now, composite shots in HitFilm Express is where you create all of your advanced visual effects, your video compositing, your motion graphics, your animated text templates, and it is an entire topic, a huge topic all in itself. Therefore, I decided to create a part 2 and a dedicated video for composite shots rather than trying to stuff the topic into the last video. So in this tutorial, I want to show you how to create and work with composite shots in HitFilm Express and by extension HitFilm Pro, because the two work exactly the same way. Now, this is going to be a low intermediate tutorial, and I will assume that you have watched the last part, my absolute beginner tutorial for HitFilm Express. If you haven't yet, I'm going to drop you a link to that down in the video description, so go and check that out first if you haven't watched it yet, and then come back here. But now I feel like I've waffled on for long enough. Let's jump right into the tutorial. Welcome to the exciting world of HitFilm Express. This is where we ended up at the very end of the last part for this tutorial, which was my HitFilm Express 12 for absolute beginner video. Link for that is going to be down in the video description. But don't stress if you didn't watch the tutorial or follow along all the way. Just to show you, this is the edit we created, which is a small walkthrough of the Jackalope Hotel down here in Melbourne, Victoria. And it's actually a fairly complex edit. There's different video layers on top of each other, different tracks for music and all sorts of other cool things. However, now let's talk about where composite shots come into the mix. Now, the editor timeline or video editing is really about laying out your content left to right sequentially to kind of put together the actual video, right? So that's all the different shots that you're going through to tell your story or convey the message that you want to convey. Video compositing, on the other hand, and where composite shots come in, is all about layering different visual materials on top of each other and kind of merging them together into a single shot. So right here at the beginning of our edit, we essentially have a very simple video composite. We have this little video insert composited and layered on top of our base footage. There's even some blending happening here because of the transition. So this is essentially video compositing, but on the editor timeline itself, you are quite limited in what you can do. If you want to create advanced motion graphics, advanced visual effects, cool things like cloning and morphing effects, text, work with 3D and motion tracking, all of that stuff, all of that happens inside a composite shot. In HitFilm, you actually have different ways of creating composite shots. The easiest one is actually to click a video clip that you have on your editor timeline. So you can simply right click it and select to make composite shot, and that will convert this simple video into a composite shot, which is a container that then contains this video. But within that composite shot, you can then add lots of other visual elements and create some really cool effects and motion graphics. So usually you convert individual clips to composite shots, so they sit within your main edit. You may have some visual effects that you want to add, so you may want to convert one to a composite shot. But because I don't want to assume that you followed the previous tutorial or that you have this edit already available, we're going to start out from scratch. So we're going to come into the media panel and simply click on New. In here, we're now going to select to create a new composite shot. This is going to bring up the composite shot properties where you can give your composite shot a name. Maybe let's call this one Vignette Comp. And then you can pop open a template and again select your resolution. I'm just going to go with 1080p Full HD at 24 frames per second. Right now it's set to 30 seconds duration. Let's just make it 10 seconds long. It'll be plenty long for this tutorial. Then your resolution, 1920 by 1080, 24 frames per second, because that's the template I had selected. Square pixels, or the sample rate we're going to leave on default, and then simply hit OK. Here we are now inside our composite shot. In the bottom, you'll find two tabs. Right now, we're in this Vignette Comp, our composite shot. You can easily click back to the editor timeline at any point in time, but let's just return to the Vignette Comp. And then under the media, in the miscellaneous folder, let's bring this open, you'll find two clips, a vignette, Vignette, I mistyped that, .mp4 and a creepybunny.mp4. And again, if you do want to follow along with this tutorial, you'll be able to download these clips from our website. So simply go to surfacedstudio.com/downloads and you'll be able to grab these files to follow along. Now, in this composite shot, we can now layer and stack different visual elements and blend them together and merge them and apply effects to them, add text and motion graphics. And the first thing I want to do is just want to add some video material. So let's grab this vignette.mp4 and grab it and just drag it into the composite shot and let go. Here it is. It's one video layer. So this is now our visual layer. You can scrub through. Cool, it's just a very simple handheld shot shooting out over the vignette that sits behind the Jackalope Hotel. Then let's also grab this creepybunny.mp4 and let's drag that into our vignette comp. And you won't actually be able to drop this clip on this vignette MP4 layer because it's not an editor. You're not creating a video edit, so you can't sequentially easily arrange things. So for example, if you drop this right here and try to drop it, it now split my layers. It actually didn't do what I wanted. And now two visual elements or two visual layers because it's not an editor. It's not meant to be sequential. So Control or Command and Z, let's undo that. Grab the creepy bunny, bring it into the composite shot, and I'm going to drop it above the vignette.mp4. So it's just going to sit right on top. If you scrub through, yep, there it is. That's now our creepy bunny. But this layer now covers the layer up that's underneath it. You can disable this little eye icon here on the side so you can view the layer that sits underneath it, but let's blend these together to actually make use of the fact that we're inside the composite shot where we have all the power. First, however, let's come up to the main menu, go into View, Workspaces, and I'm actually going to switch this over to the compositing workspace just because I prefer the layout for when I'm working within a composite shot. So let's switch that over. So it's going to rearrange a few things. Going to make the panel on the left hand side a little bit smaller, which is by default on your controls panel where you control all of the effects and settings for your layers. You have an effects panel, big view on the side, and then down in the bottom you'll see the timeline. The controls panel on the left-hand side gives you access to all of the layer properties. And in here, you'll find a lot of the same options that you will see on your editor timeline, but you have a whole bunch of additional options here for different alignment modes. You can set up parenting, you can set up tracks, masks, effects you have on your editor timeline as well. You can add behaviors that can control the movement of your layers in a composite shot using physics, and obviously some audio controls. The first thing I want to do with this creepy bunny selected, let's change the blend mode from normal over to screen. So now you can see the vignette through this creepy bunny clip. The one thing I might do just for the purpose of this recording, let's select the vignette.mp4. I'm just going to actually, I'm just going to rename this. This is bugging me. Let's call this vignette. Let's come into the layer settings and let's just mute this because I think it's a bit too noisy. I'm also going to do that for the creepy bunny because I think it's just interfering with the recording. If you now scrub through. Cool, so that's kind of the composited effect. Now you can control all of the settings in your controls panel, but you can actually also expand the layer directly here in your composite shot. So let's expand the creepy bunny, expand the transform, and you have access to things like opacity, anchor point, position, and scale right in here. Let's just bring the opacity down to maybe around 50%. And within the viewer panel, same as you can do in the editor timeline, you can actually just scale this down. I'm going to hold down Shift, and just scale this in a little bit, kind of position the bunny just a little bit higher up. So it's kind of an ominous omen in the sky. Maybe I'll bring the opacity back just a little bit. So now we've kind of got our two video layers composited right here. Let's collapse the creepy bunny again. And one powerful thing you have within composite shots that you don't have on your editor timeline is you have a whole bunch of additional helper layers that you can add. It's not just visual material like images and videos and audios you can add, you can create new helper layers. Those ones you can create by pressing this little new layer button right here. And you have the option to create plane layers, which are solid colored planes that you can use and blend and merge and mask and do all sorts of cool stuff with. You can create text, again, similar to your editor timeline. You can create a grade layer, which is a layer that will automatically apply any effects that you apply to this layer to all of the layers that sit below it. Then you have a camera and a light for when you're working with 3D, though working with 3D is going to be a bit outside of the scope of this tutorial. If you want me to create a separate tutorial for that, just leave me some comments down below just so I can see how many people are actually interested in that. And then you have a point layer, and a point layer is just a placeholder. It's just a point within your composite shot, but you can use it for cool things such as parenting other elements to it or motion tracking, which again might be topics for other tutorials. For now, let's just create a simple plane layer. Now you can give your plane layer a name. Let's just call this one Blood Moon. Resolution 1920 by 1080 matches our composite shot. And let's just change the color to like a dark, bloody-ish red. Hit OK. Now we have this plane layer in our composite shot, but because it's covering up everything, let's select it and drag it below the creepy bunny. So now the creepy bunny is visible, but we still have this red plane. But before we blend this a bit nicer onto our vignette, let's just apply an effect to it. So in the effects panel, and this is why I like the compositing workspace, because the effects are all right here. Let's just come open to gradients and fill, and let's maybe apply a color gradient to it. So let's just drag and drop this effect onto the layer in our composite shot. In the viewer, I now have two controls to control the start and the end of this gradient. Well, I might actually switch this around to kind of have the dark red and then the bright at the top. So kind of this blends into white towards the top. In the controls, I can pop this open. I can change the start and the end color as well as how it's blended together. Now, for anything that has a gradient, what can happen very easily, I don't know whether you can see this, you can get these ugly banding really, really quickly. The easiest way to not have banding in your gradients is to scatter the ramp. So let's jack up this ramp scatter here a little bit. That's going to add a bit of noise and people go, ooh, that looks ugly. But a little bit of noise actually looks quite organic and it reduces that banding, those banding artifacts really nicely. So that looks okay. Let's just zoom back out to fit. And now with the Blood Moon layer still selected, let's bring open the layer properties. Let's change the blend mode from normal. Maybe we'll go over to overlay. Yeah, cool. So this kind of adds a little bit of ominous red color. Again, for this tutorial, feel free to tweak this in any way that you want. I really just want to take you through the cool stuff that you can do within a composite shot that you can't do on your editor timeline, so you understand the value of why you want to use a composite shot over just, adding things on top of each other directly in your edit. The one thing I might do, I might actually select this creepy bunny.mp4 and change the blend mode from screen. I kind of want it a bit darker, to be honest. Maybe I'll just set this to darken, and maybe I'll just make this a little bit smaller still and kind of position the bunny right there. Just kind of, it fits in just a little bit better. I kind of don't like this camera move down here though. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to right click the layer right here, come up to speed and duration. I'm actually going to slow this down to maybe a quarter. I just want this to be quite slow, to be honest, so that it plays. Oh, it's almost too slow. Right click, speed duration. Let's try 50%. I think that should be slow enough, just so we get still a bit of the movement of the bunny. Yep, cool. That looks all right, but it's very obvious that it's still a really ugly insert of an image, right? So what I want to do now is I actually kind of want to cut out just this bunny head here so that you only see this creepy bunny head and you don't get the buildings coming in or other things happening. And for that, you have probably the most powerful tool in your toolbox available within a composite shot, and that is masks. On the left-hand side of the viewer, you will have the familiar selection, hand, and text tools, but then you have three tools for a rectangular mask, an ellipse mask, and a freehand masking tool. Masks allow you to draw areas onto your layers that define where the layer is transparent or opaque. Let's, for example, just select this rectangular masking tool, make sure you have the creepy bunny selected, and let's just click onto the layer and drag over to the right-hand side. And you can see I'm now revealing this layer. I'm applying a mask that defines where this layer is visible. Let's just drag this over to maybe round about here. And now I've essentially cut this section out of the layer by just using a mask. You will find different options for the masks down in the layer window for your composite shot. Under the masks, you have this mask. You can actually rename these as well if you wanted to. And you have option for defining the shape. Let me just puff this out a little bit. And in the settings for the shape of a mask, you will find an option for expansion. So if you look at the mask right now, if you increase this, it will essentially push out the boundaries or the borders of this mask. You can also bring this in to contract what you're defining with this mask. And all of these properties can be animated. Let's just bring this back to round about 0. Then you have feathering and a feather strength. Most of the time when you're compositing video layers together, having these harsh edges looks really unnatural, right? It's really obvious that it's just a really bad composite. It's just a square blob inside this video. Feathering softens out and blends these edges together. And for most of the time when you're using masks, you probably want at least a little bit of feathering. Like for example, if you're creating a cloning effect and you have one shot on the right side and one shot on the left side, you apply a mask to one of them. So you're in both shots and you use a little bit of feathering to blend that edge between them so it doesn't look so unnatural. So if you jack up this feathering, can you see how now this layer blends a lot nicer into it? And this option here, feather both, just means that the feathering is applied both to the outside and the inside of that mask, so it spreads both ways. You can change this to only be out. So now the feathering amount, this 227 pixels, is outwards. If you set it to in, it feathers it inwards, but I'm just going to leave this on both. I'm just going to bring this in a little bit, maybe to about 150 to 200, but I'm going to bring the expansion. So I'm kind of just pulling this back a little bit. I find I get a bit more control that way. So maybe set the expansion to about 0, feathering to about 170. And roundness is just, it's the roundness of the corners. So wherever you have an edge, you can kind of round this out so it's not so harsh. Again, it's more obvious if you don't have any feathering, but let's just jack this up to maybe 150 or so. Let's just zoom out a bit and play this back. Cool, that looks pretty nice. Now there's a whole bunch of wobble at the beginning of this shot. We can see where I'm kind of manhandling that camera pretty badly. So let's come to where the shot actually stabilizes, probably around about here or so. Let's collapse this creepy bunny, take the vignette MP4. I'm going to click on the left side of this layer and just pull this over to the right hand side to bring that in. So I'm cutting off, trimming off the beginning. Works very similar to what it does on the edited timeline. I'm just going to drag this over to the left hand side because I really just want the clip or the part of the clip where it's kind of smooth. Yep, I think that actually works quite all right. There's still a little bit of movement. So you can either trim this down further or maybe I'll slow this down just a little bit as well. Or maybe go to 75% just to make this a little bit longer. Yep, I think that works all right. And now the creepy bunny is composited a whole lot nicer into the shot. Let's reselect the creepy bunny. You may notice you don't actually see the masks currently applied to the layer. If you want to do that, come into the controls or expand the layer and just make sure you select the mask again so you can see it in the viewer. Now let's grab the elliptical mask tool. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a quite vertical, long elliptical mask all the way through. And you can see how that is adding content to what I've masked out, right? So let's drag this right over the center. And this elliptical mask now is added to what we're masking out with the first one. So they're applied in order. First, we're applying this soft rectangular mask, and then we're applying this elliptical mask. The cool thing is that masks actually have a mode. Right now, the mode of this second mask, of this elliptical mask, is set to additive. So it adds the content of that mask to what you've already masked out. You can change this over to be, for example, an intersection. Now you can only see the intersection of this mask with all of the previous ones. You could also set this to subtract. So you're going to cut out this mask from what you've already masked out. And this gives you a huge amount of flexibility to do some pretty intricate masking work. Let's change this mode back to add. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to delete the rectangular mask we already have. Let's just zoom in on our viewer. Go to the selection tool, and with the mask selected, all masks you can modify directly in the viewer. The elliptical ones and the square ones have just a number of points that you can push out. I'm just going to push this out a little bit, make it a bit smaller, and kind of just wrap it right around the bunny head. I don't really want to include the cutoff that happens down there. Just kind of make it nice and round, just so we kind of see the center of that bunny head. Let's expand the shape for this mask. I'm just going to add a bit of feathering just to make it a little bit softer. And now if we play this back, yep, that looks quite good, but you can see that the mask does not actually follow the movement of the bunny, right? The mask is kind of just stuck to this layer right in the center, and because the footage in that layer moves, the mask doesn't actually follow the movement of the bunny. However, masks can be animated, and this is where the true power of a composite shot and of masking comes in. Even though it's a very basic tool for video compositing, it's also really powerful. So let's select our elliptical mask, expand the transform, and in here you can animate the opacity, the position, the scale, rotation, but also the path itself. So the shape right now is just this ellipse. You can animate the path of this mask. So what I want to do is let's set a keyframe on the path and the position and maybe even the scale on this mask. Let's just come back a little bit to maybe here. And now I'm going to grab the mask in the viewer and just drag it down to follows kind of the bunny head. It's not going to be perfect, but it'll kind of just follow along somewhat to kind of stay on target. Right now, all I'm changing is the position, but if I was to bring this in, you'd notice that it'll also changes the scale. So let's just make sure this follows along as best as we can. So now you've got this ominous bunny head composited into the sky. Now the freehand masking tool works exactly the same way, but before we apply it, let's reselect the bunny layer. You can't select the mask, you have to have the layer selected if you want to apply a mask, and then you can freehand draw a mask shape. It won't get applied until you close the mask. So right now this mask would not get applied, but if I close it off in the end, now this mask gets applied, but it's nothing new. So let's undo a couple of those. Also, if you click and hold, HitFilm will convert those mask points into Bezier points, so you can actually create really nice rounded shapes. And then close your mask, and there you can see this is now being added by this additional mask. And again, you can animate it, name it, do whatever you want with it. But let's just delete that mask for now. Let's come up into our layers, collapse everything. Let's add a new layer, and this time I'm going to add a grade layer. And I like to do that a lot at the very end. I like to add some color grading to everything that sits below it. So either wherever you use this composite shot, you can apply an effect to that as a whole, like if you go onto your editor timeline, and now in your media panel, you should find your vignette composite shot. If you drag and drop that onto your editor timeline, and this works like any other video layer or any other video element. So let's just drop this off here on the right hand side. So this is now our composite shot. It's kind of nested. Everything we've built up, all of the visual effects and everything is nested inside this composite shot. So you can now use it on your editor timeline, and HitFilm will treat it like any other piece of media on your timeline. So you can trim it, you can edit it, you can animate the opacity, do whatever you want with it, apply effects to it. And the moment you want to make changes, you can actually either double click onto the composite shot in your media panel or double click onto the composite shot directly in your editor timeline. So if you now double click this vignette comp on our editor timeline, we're just going to go straight back into this panel. Also useful if you accidentally close this panel, just double click onto the composite shot in your media panel and you'll go straight back into it. Now we've added this new grade layer, and a grade layer will apply any effect that you apply to it to all of the layers below it. In order to get good use of these, I personally always like to apply some color grading and color correction to all of the clips in my composite shot. It's kind of like when you're making a sandwich. You have all of these different layers that you place on top of each other, but it's the act of putting them through a common process, a common transformation. Like when you put that sandwich into a toaster, all of those layers get bound together, they'll stick a bit better together and it looks more realistic. So I always like to apply some color grading or color correction to all of the layers. So grade layer at the very top. Let's come into maybe color correction, and in here you will find a curves effect, which again is free with the Express version. Let's drag and drop that onto the grade layer. Now you could try to open the settings down here in the layer window for your composite shot, but you have limited options here. I prefer go to your controls, expand the curves in here, and you actually get to see the proper curves. And now if you push a little bit more contrast into it, you can see that this actually affects our entire shot. Let's just come into the red channel. Maybe I'll tone the red down a little bit, but I'm only going to tone it down in the dark areas. So the dark areas are going to go a little bit more green, bluish. So it just doesn't feel so overly red. It looks pretty sinister, pretty dark. So this grade layer here, if you disable the visibility, it won't get applied. If you enable it, you'll see the grading layer being applied to everything. And it does make everything gel together a whole lot better, just to apply some common effects like color grading, color correction, some tints or other things to all of the layers below it. It will just merge everything together so much nicer. Now, the last thing I want to touch on very quickly is parenting. And for that, let's just create some text in our scene. So in the left side of the viewer, let's select the text tool, click into our composite shot, and let's type some text. Let's select everything with Control or Command and A, and let's try to find, where's the text tool? There's the text panel. Let's just find a nice and creepy font. Yep, I think that looks all right. Let's just bring the font size up a little bit, come to the selection tool, and let's just drag this over. And there you go, Creepy Bunny is watching you. I might actually give this text just a little bit of an outline as well, but I'm going to make this black. I just kind of want the text to stand out a little bit stronger, so it's just a little bit easier to see. Let's come to the very beginning. I'm going to expand the Creepy Bunny MP4 and the transform properties. I'm going to set a keyframe on the opacity and start that out at 0, so there's no Creepy Bunny just yet. Let's select the text, expand that, expand the transform, set a keyframe on the position. I'm going to reduce the X position. I'm just going to move this over. You can also just use these arrows here directly in the view. Let's just pull this over all the way to the left. And let's just animate this to come in. So maybe a couple of seconds in, let's just come down to our Creepy Bunny. The opacity is 0 still. Maybe I'll bring this keyframe over to the right hand side. You can just click and drag these keyframes around. And this is where the power of the composite shot comes in. Again, you have a lot more detailed control over animations and keyframes and all of the different properties and effects within a composite shot than you have on your editor timeline. Because again, editing is really more a left to right sequential workflow of laying out the clips, whereas a composite shot is really just blending it all together to create something really interesting. So let's just come forward a little bit. I'm going to jack the opacity up to about 80%. So this Creepy Bunny is going to start fading in right about there. Let's come up, and I'm actually going to animate the text as well. And again, I'm going to bring this keyframe over a little bit. So we're starting to animate the text here. And then by then, let's just push this text over to the right hand side. I want to kind of have this text kind of shooting in. Let's rewind a little bit and play this back. Yep, that works all right. Now let's enable motion blur on this layer here. And for that, you've got to switch over here on the right hand side. These little, looks like streaked ball, just a few blobs. So now we're enabling motion blur on that layer. So you get this really nice motion blur of the text coming in. And let's just quickly talk about parenting. Let's say I wanted to have a bit of a subtitle here. So let's grab the text tool, click into our composite shot, and let's add a subtitle. Let's select all of the text, make it just a little bit smaller. I think I'll get rid of the outline as well. Let's just position this where we want, so maybe right about there. Now, this subtitle doesn't animate, right? So we could now get the keyframes from our main text. And again, let's rename this one. Let's rename this text to title, and the other one will be our subtitle. And I could now copy those positioning keyframes and kind of attach them to the subtitle as well. But I can also simply parent this subtitle to this title layer. So any animation, any movement that happens on the title will automatically apply to the subtitle. Parenting kind of works like, imagine you're the parent and you have a bunch of children. Wherever the parent goes, the children will follow. In order to do that, let's select the subtitle. Over on the right hand side, you have this little drop down. If you pop this open, you'll find all of the other layers selectable, but you can't select yourself because you're defining who is your parent. The subtitle, we're going to say your parent is the title layer. So now this title layer is the parent of this subtitle. What this means is that if you move or animate this layer, you can see the child, the subtitle always follows along automatically. The same applies to all rotation as well to any scaling. The child always follows along. The cool thing is you can move the child freely and you can animate this independent of what the parent does. But the moment you move the parent again, it just follows along. And you can create really long chains of parenting to create some really cool things like solar system where one planet depends on another. So you can do some cool stuff, but let's just undo that. Maybe I'll actually give this just a little bit of rotation just to make the seam just a little bit more disturbing. Let's actually open up the title because yeah, I've actually created a new position keyframe here. Let's just collapse those, come back right onto that. Let's just move it down maybe a little bit. And so now what's happening, they kind of both move in at the same time. Now let's also enable motion blur on this subtitle right here. Collapse this layer. The grade layer, you may want to move it to the very top, but I don't actually want the text to be affected. I kind of want the text to stay on top of everything else. And it's actually looking really good. Like it was really simple. We got lots of visual material layered on top of each other, and there isn't really a limit on how many videos or images or animations you want to add on top of each other and just merge them together using masks and different effects and different animations. Now, the last thing I want to do, let's just add like a lightning strike to this bunny just as the bunny has finished appearing. Maybe at this point, we'll just get one lightning strike. For that, let's create a new plane layer. I'm going to call this one lightning. Let's change the color over to black, hit OK, and OK. Let's drag this below our grade layer so only the grade and the text is visible. Let's come into our effects panels. Let's search for lightning and you'll find the free lightning and electricity effect. Let's grab this and apply it to our lightning plane. And if you scrub through, you can see this really cool lightning effect. I actually really like this effect. It looks really cool. Let's just drag this over to the right hand side and the impact point right down there. Right now the plane is opaque, so we can't see anything underneath it. So let's bring open the layer properties for our lightning layer and change the blend mode from normal. Maybe we'll change it over to additive. Yep, that works quite well, but it's hard to see top right here. So what I might do, let's reselect the lightning and electricity effect. Let's bring the starting point over to the right hand side. I kind of want it striking downwards straight through the image, so it's just a little bit more obvious. If you scrub through, the lightning is visible all the time, which is not what I want. So maybe I just want it striking right here. And you can either trim this layer down to be a single frame, or you can just animate the opacity. I prefer just animating the opacity, but it doesn't really make much of a difference. So let's expand the layer, expand the transform, set the keyframe for opacity at 100%, go a single frame backwards with comma on your keyboard, set it to 0. Full stop moves you a frame forward. Let's move 3 frames forward and let's set it back to 0. So we kind of get like a 2-second strike of that lightning coming in right when the title is there. So that looks pretty cool. And maybe I'll add a glow effect as well. So in the effects panel, let's search for glow. And again, there's a few paid add-ons, but there's also a glow effect under lights and flares. Let's grab this effect and drag it into our composite shot. onto the lightning layer. And again, I can determine whether this effect happens before the lightning and electricity or after. I obviously want it after because otherwise the glow won't actually affect anything other than just a solid black plane, because that's all it is until we apply the lightning. So let's drop that in right after. Again, you can come back to the controls and just expand the effect right in here. Let's just jack the intensity up a fair bit, maybe to almost 5. And I'm also going to push the radius up. I want a very large, very intense, but very large diffuse glow kind of going over most of the image. So it just makes the lightning look a little bit more intense. And now if you rewind and play this back. Now that's a pretty intense bunny. The cool thing is that we've done all of this work inside our composite shot. If you now go back to the editor timeline where we are using this composite shot, all of the changes, all of the animations, everything we've added into it is now available directly on your editor timeline. So you didn't have to update anything because you're using this composite shot, which by double clicking onto it, contains all of this visual material. It contains all of our composite elements, all of these cool effects and videos and animations. It's really easy to create a composite shot within your edit somewhere for a special effect or a motion graphic title or the outro, and then just tweak it in the composite shot. It stays in your edit exactly where it was before, and you can just reuse it as often as you want to. It's just a piece of visual material, so I can come to my media panel, grab another copy and drop that in anywhere else. It's the exact same shot, and if I made a change to this composite shot, it would affect both copies because they both contain the same material. They're both the same composite shot. It makes it really easy to create reusable motion graphics, title sequences, and there's a whole bunch of other cool things that I haven't talked about yet, like publishing properties that allow you to create text templates, which are kind of like these composite shot presets, but you can tweak the text with every copy that you drop on your editor timeline. Again, topic for another tutorial, same as things as working with 3D and motion tracking and some of the advanced stuff. But do let me know down in the comments below what you would like to see next with HitFilm Express or with HitFilm Pro, stuff that you're keen on. I really like making tutorials for this product, especially with version 12. It's taken such a huge leap forward. I'm really excited about what's coming up. But I really hope that you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope that you now understand what composite shots are and why they are so important, why you want them, use them in your edit to create some really cool motion graphics or advanced visual effects. And that's all there is to it. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. If you're new here and you want to watch more content, more videos like this one, don't forget to subscribe. And because YouTube is a bit weird, also enable that little bell icon so you actually get notified. If you have any comments, questions, feedback, you want to support me, check the links in the video description and leave everything else down in the comment section below. And finally, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I will see you later.